What is sulfur? Sulfur can be described as a solid. It is a pale, yellow, non-metallic, brittle element and is widely distributed in the close proximity to hot springs and volcanoes. It can also be found in many minerals and ores. Sulfur is an essential element in the life process of all living things, including microorganisms, higher plants, animals, and man. It is an important part of proteins and vitamins needed to sustain life in all biological organisms. Sulfur forms a basic substance that is involved in oxygen usage, which makes it especially important for all organisms. Some bacteria use sulfur as an electron acceptor. Sulfur can also serve as a food to some chemiotrophic organisms. Sulfur is also essential for plant growth. Sulfur is clearly very important to our ecosystem. However, sulfur cannot be taken in by organisms simply in its sulfur form. Sulfur from all sources must either be in sulfate form or be converted to sulfate form before it can be used by plants. About 95% of the total sulfur content of most soils is contained in organic matter. As this soil organic matter is broken down or decomposed, the organic sulfur is mineralized into sulfate form. Sulfate sulfur can then be taken up by the roots of growing plants. Breakdown of all the sulfur in organic matter does not occur in a single year, but rather in a continuous process requiring a considerable amount of time. Decomposers and bacteria are very important to the cycle of sulfur. Bacteria are essential to the sulfur cycle because each bacteria is capable of converting from one form to sulfur to another. Decomposers are very important because they return sulfur back into the soil from the atmosphere. Sulfur can be found as a trace element in coal and oil. When these are burned in power plants and industrial boilers, the sulfur combines with oxygen to form sulfur dioxide. Because SO2 does not react with most chemicals found in the atmosphere, it can travel long distances. Eventually, if it comes in contact with the ozone or hydrogen peroxide, it can be converted to sulfur trioxide. Sulfur trioxide can dissolve in water, forming a dilute solution of sulfuric acid. This is also known as acid rain. Sulfur also occurs naturally through volcanoes and sea sprays. The release of sulfur through precipitation is actually a serious problem and is known to cause a lot of environmental and ecological damage. Sulfate is released into the air and mixed with water and clouds. They form acidic pollutants known as acid rain. This acid rain then falls like normal rain would, but far more damaging to the environment. This is how the sulfur is released back into the earth from the air. Acid rain can be released through rain, snow, sleet, or hail. Acid rain is caused by a chemical reaction that begins when compounds like sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide are released into the air. Plant life is damaged by acid rain because acid rain tends to kill or limit the amount of nutrients a plant can take in because it damages the tree's leaves. Acid rain will often fall into oceans, lakes, and rivers. This will change the pH level of the water, which can greatly impact creatures and organisms living in the water. Acid rain can clearly have very damaging properties to its environment. Luckily for us here in Alberta, we do not have to deal with acid rain. Where Alberta is situated is downwind from the Pacific coast and the Rocky Mountains, meaning there's far less industry in those areas, which means there's less CO2 going into the air, causing less acid rain. That is why we here in Alberta do not have to deal with the damaging effects of acid rain.